The content presented is for entertainment purposes only. Some content may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. So George R.R. Martin talks House of Dragons, many time jumps. The Game of Thrones prequel series, set almost 2 centuries prior to the events of the Game of Thrones, follows the events of Martin's novel Fire and Blood, with showrunners Ryan Condal and Miguel Sapochnik, sorry I'm terrible at names, on board for season 1. Though recently separated the series, Sapochnik, Martin serves as an executive producer on the series. In stark contrast, I see what you did there, is reported lack of involvement in the final few seasons of the Game of Thrones. Martin is actively involved with the show. The series has taken on the ambitious task of chronicling the Targaryen Civil War, aka the Dance of Dragons. So, not a lot of book to series creators get to be a pivotal part in the creative process. Now, J.R.R. Martin did have a lot of involvement, or I guess a little bit more, probably less than he is now, in the original Game of Thrones series, and then stepped away. And as you can tell from the last 2 seasons of the Game of Thrones, it definitely affected the series. It affected the character progression, and it affected the way that the storytelling was created. And with Martin as an executive producer, this has given fans some relief as the series progresses. My question to you, has it translated from creator to screen well enough? Now, I'll be 100% honest with you. I haven't watched the whole series front to back. I've only kind of gotten glimpses here and there. And it's going to be kind of interesting to see how this ends. There's been a couple other series my wife and I have been watching, and we're kind of keeping track of the House of Dragons. We're kind of keeping track of Rings of Power because we kind of want to see where these big budgeted series are going to go. And it's going to be really interesting what's going to happen in the end. Now, it was very unfortunate for the Game of Thrones series the last 2 seasons. Unfortunately, the last 2 seasons, they did not turn out very well, in my opinion. I feel like the way that they ended it was not the greatest way to end it. And it really, I think, left a bad taste in the fans' mouths. So I'm hoping that they do justice in this series. It's just, from what I can tell, the different time jumps, it's not really translating really well. And the storytelling is kind of choppy. Most of the actors, unfortunately, are just kind of mid. There's not really too many individuals who are really standing out, and I think the story is not really following either the right actors or the right characters, or something's going on where it's just not translating well, to be honest. The House of Dragons have made an impression on audiences since its premiere in August, and is the less praised aspects of the series is the many time jumps season 1 has included, beginning with a 6-month time jump in episode 2, moving into a 3-year time jump in episode 3, a huge 10-year time jump in episode 6, and a 6-year time jump in episode 8. Due to so much skipping around in time, Alicent and Rhaenyra were recast along with their children. I mean, that's obvious if you're moving that far into the future. Though the series has mostly enjoyed a triumphant run, some viewers have been frustrated by the many changes the show has undergone. And honestly, rightfully so. Unfortunately, when you don't portray stuff in order and you go through kind of like a linear time as far as maybe days occurring, or maybe a couple of days or a couple of weeks from episode to episode, when you start spanning too far off in time, you kind of lose the storytelling, because you start telling all these stories with these characters and they start growing up and they start kind of developing, and then you start moving forward into the future, and then you recast everybody and now everybody's different. It's just, honestly, it's a jumbled mess. Now, I personally haven't sat down. I haven't given this first season a real shot. I will be honest with you guys. But I'm still upset by Disney and how they're wanting to, or allowing others to influence children with sexual ideologies. So I guess my question to you is, does the time jumps as well as the casting changes, only mere episodes into this season, make sense to you? Because the episodes that I have seen, it doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really flow really well. For me, it's really, really important that things are done chronologically, unless it's like one of those things where you're kind of in a pattern of going back and forth. There's not really a pattern to these time changes. And so it's kind of jarring and it doesn't really mesh well, unfortunately. But with that being said, I've gleaned a few parts of the episode, and I was lost through all the time jumps. I was lost too, and I didn't even watch all of them religiously. And the time jumps in the middle of a series, outside of time travel, obviously, which would make sense traveling back and forth, it just doesn't work in a series. And I think this is probably the Achilles heel of this series, and I don't think it's going to progress well unless they kind of get out of this habit. Now, if they start time jumping in season 2, I really think that they're going to lose a lot of the audience, if not losing a lot of the audience already. And it seems like they should have spent more time figuring out where their time frame would end from the first season and where it would pick up again into the second, third, and fourth, and actually go through those time changes from season to season. Because I can understand with some stories that do have time progressions, with their good stories, like it makes sense, like from one season, start at one time period, maybe 5-10 years down the road, maybe season 2 or season 3 occur. That can make sort of sense as long as you're still following those characters and you're following those progressions and everything. But I think for a TV series, especially for movies, I just don't think it translates very well. I think audiences have a really hard time with that, unfortunately. So Martin commented, I wish we'd had more time to explore the relationship between Rhaenyra and Sir Harwin, the marriage of Daemon and Lena, and their times in Pentos, the birth of various and sundry children. And yes, Alicent gave Viserys 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter. Their youngest son, Darion, is down in Old Town. We just did not have the time to work him in this season. And everything else we had to skip, sure. But there are always so many minutes in an episode. More on HBO on the network shows. I once wrote 4, and only so many episodes in a season. This is just some parts of that quote. It's a lot longer, but there's a lot of other information I wanted to get to. And what's funny is that the show is straight to streaming. Like, they don't have time constraints where you have to produce a show for television where an hour episode has to be 45 minutes long in order to fill in all the commercials and have like perfect timing. So why would you do several time jumps in the first 5 episodes of a season? Like, is that not the most ridiculous thing to do? I would have to say yes. Like, why didn't we expand on these other points that are apparently, from what I've read, they're really important to the progression of the different characters and what's going on with their children. And they could have reasonably done one season with one of those timelines instead of jumping all over the place and kind of putting Viserys as the focus of this season. I think, honestly, I don't think that was a really smart decision, and I think the fans are seeing it, and I think with J.R. Martin actually having to come out and comment on it and kind of defend these time jumps, honestly, it just looks like a mess. And honestly, if I was doing it, I would not have done the time jumps in the middle of a season. That does not work very well. I would have told the story in that time for that season when you could potentially jump ahead into the next season for another frame of time. Or if there is no way to tell the story without the time jumps, move forward to where the story begins and tell their stories through the other characters. Is that hard? And I don't think it is. Like, if they knew that they're going to be doing all these time jumps, what they should have done is just skipped all of that and then tell those stories through the other characters of what happened in the past. Maybe they're looking through different records and they're learning about Viserys and what's going on. And maybe we learn about the things that happened in the past with Rhaenyra and everything that was going on with Daemon. and they're told through their children down the timeline, and maybe they're old and gray and that's what's going on. Like, I think that would be better storytelling than all of this jumping around. It's very, very unfortunate, and it's sad to see. I wonder, as time goes on, how this is going to age. If people are frustrated right now, it's only like what, episode 5 or 6 out of 10 or 13 or however many they're doing. And when it's going direct to streaming, like, they could add more episodes, couldn't they? Or is it one of those things where, nope, sorry, you only get so many episodes or so much time frame on episodes? Like, I think Netflix has done this really well, where sometimes their season premiere is actually, one quarter or even one half longer than the normal episode. So instead of them being an hour, the first episode is like hour 15, hour 30 minutes, and maybe the last episode is an hour 10, hour 15. Like, I don't see why you couldn't cut that in a way where you could have all the storytelling in there. Now, granted, and judging by how slow the story moves, at least what I've seen so far, I kind of feel like they should have proceeded forward, or they should have dedicated that first season and actually told all of those stories and not cut so much out. Because when you're doing a series, you can tell more of the story. You're not constrained to an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours in a movie. Like, you have like several movies to tell all of these tales. And so it just cracks me up, because I believe that you can do all of that. So Martin makes several key points about the structure of House of Dragons. If the series took the time to deliberate on each significant event in the almost 2 decades it has covered so far, the choice would likely have been controversial as well, with viewers criticizing the slow pacing. As it stands, the show has been forced to skip over many of those milestones for time reasons, as Martin points out, and due to the prioritizing of a singular narrative thread. I think this is disingenuous. I think they're just trying to save face. I think they're just trying to be like, hey, stick with us. We're trying to get through this. Hey, we might have made, like, they could have just said, hey, we made a bad decision. We'll fix this in season 2. But again, it's just, oh, well, no, it's your fault for pointing these things out, So if there was a focus on following one thread of time, then why does it feel jumbled together and many of the characters feel insignificant? And it kind of feels that way. Like, they introduce these huge mass amounts of characters, and it feels like there's not really a tier system as far as like, okay, these are the tier 1 characters. These are the characters that we want to follow. And then we have all the secondary tier characters. These are the ones that support the first tier characters. And these are the ones that are going to do the things to help these characters progress through their story. And why isn't there more battles? Why isn't there more fighting? Why is this just dialogue and people talking and not a lot of action going on? And I'm not saying that we have to have action in every single series, especially when it comes to these, very dramatized pieces that kind of go over into the far, far past, like in medieval times, but there's also dragons. I just don't think that what they're doing right now is what the fans want. And there's something to say for that, because, when you are the creator of something, like a universe, that J.R.R. Martin has created, it's kind of important to know if they can translate it well from book to screen, right? And what's really important about translating it from book to screen is that it embodies the world and it embodies the characters in a way that is pleasing, obviously, to the person that's consuming that content. Now obviously, it's going to be kind of difficult. Like for instance, if you're in a band and you're in a rock group and you make rock music, and then you go from one album to another, that rock music kind of becomes more bubblegum pop, that leaves a bad taste in the mouths of the fans. Sure. Like for instance, Foo Fighters, when they went from, what was it? What was the album after In Your Honor? Let's find out really quick. Foo Fighters discography. Because I kind of feel like the Foo Fighters hit their peak somewhere around In Your Honor. Now, Echoes, Silence, Patience, and Grace was a decent album. It really was. But they literally sold like 600,000 less copies than In Your Honor. So something happened between that time, and then it just went down from there, you know? So In Your Honor was 1.5 billion copies sold, or I guess sales. I guess nowadays it's not quite the same way as it was in the past. Then Wasting Light was almost half of that. So Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace was about 900 million. Wasting Light, 660 million. Sonic Highways, 490 million. Concrete and Gold, 212 million. So something happened in between that time where they kind of lost their identity, and fans started to see that they were changing and doing things differently. And this is where I think it's really important that bands kind of stick to their sound. Yeah, obviously your gear is going to change. You're going to have better guitars, better stomp pedals, better amplifiers and stuff like that, but still try to keep around the same sound and then just clean it up a little bit and keep writing songs the way that you always written, and not like slip into this zone where you go from your rock sound into this kind of nebulous, who knows what's going to happen in the next release. It's really important to stay that way. Now, obviously, if you're going to do something different, just make a whole different thing, create a new super group, make a new band. You know, it's Foo Fighters with, I don't know, pick your band here, Foo Fighters and Linkin Park, like kind of amalgamated together, and they have a new super group, and they're going to make a new album. You wouldn't call it, you know, Foo Fighters. You wouldn't call it, the Linkin Park. You would create a new band, you'd have a new name, and it would be a new sound, new feel, new way of writing, even though some of the players are similar and the same. And so what sucks about what's going on with this particular series, trying to be a follow-up / prequel of the Game of Thrones, is that some of the players are in there, but the storytelling and the things that are going on with the White Walkers, and like, where's all that stuff? Right now, it just seems like it's Game of Thrones without the action, without the White Walkers. And unfortunately, that's what made this series work, that they have that impending threat, and they're all trying to, you know, gather up and be a part of the throne. And unfortunately, there's not that underlying doom, which was happening almost every single episode. And there were fight scenes. There's things that were going on. Now it's just like cloak and dagger type stuff, and it's not interesting. But I digress. So if they're following a thread, why does it feel all jumbled up? It's because of the time jumps. Doesn't work. Not only that, there isn't many actors who feel like they're standing out from the rest, as they feel very meh, where the Game of Thrones series felt like each character and actor playing that role seemed important in one way or another. House of Dragons feels not only slow but bland, as well as the CGI is just also mid. That's something that I felt was pretty interesting too, is that the CGI in comparison from the House of Dragons and Game of Thrones was not that great, unfortunately. So with very few episodes left for season 1, there is still time for House of Dragons to justify its time jumps in the eyes of critics and finish strong, setting up an intriguing season 2, which will hopefully feature less skipping around in time. I mean, hopefully that'll be the case. Hopefully this will just be a one-time thing and they won't do any more jumping in the future and the past throughout the next season. I mean, only time will tell. But honestly, it's just not looking good for House of Dragons. It seems like the show is an overrated average show in comparison to others as well as its predecessor. I get why HBO is trying to keep the Game of Thrones flame alive with this series, but it's just not there. It's much like its adversary Rings of Power. A lot of money thrown at it with a lot of storytelling that feels like it goes nowhere, boring, flat, and forgetful. It's very, very unfortunate. We want to see these things succeed. We want to see these renditions or kind of bringing back these different series that we know and that we love. And unfortunately, I kind of feel like we're in a time now where we need to start going back to the drawing board and just make good stories again. Find new characters, find new storylines. Or even like do old storylines, but with new characters and a new background. I mean, look at Rhaenyra, the Last Dragon. Sorry, I probably butchered that. Rhaena in The Last Dragon. It was basically a mix of what was the two that we decided it kind of felt like something between Mulan and Moana. And and if you look at the story, it plays out kind of similar in the same way, just a little bit different things going on, different characters, maybe some different plot points and twists and turns, but honestly, pretty similar. But I digress. So, like I said in the last one, this is something I really wanted to go over with you guys. So the Pharmaceutical Association is trying to sue the U.S. government. And it's kind of been interesting. I would definitely recommend going and seeing, or I guess you could listen as well, the podcast from Joe Rogan Experience with Mr. Buell, I believe his name is. Of course, I didn't have it up here right away, so I'm gonna have to take a moment to kind of look at it really quick. Hopefully it doesn't play on its own. We'll try to stop it if that's the case. Okay, it didn't. Great. So it's Joe Rogan number 1873, Brigham Bueller. He is the founder of Ways to Well, Functional and Regenerative Care Clinic. And he was also a pharmaceutical rep for many, many years before he decided to create his own companies and try to do things the right way without hurting people, without taking advantage of grandma and grandpa who are literally dying. And unfortunately, these drugs are just helping with the system, with the symptoms, and not curing the underlying issues. And that's something that's really unfortunate. So the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association, an organization representing pharmacy benefit managers, has sued the federal government in an effort to block a rule requiring them to disclose the net prices by negotiate with drug companies. In a complaint filed Thursday in Washington, D.C. federal court, the PCMA said the November 2020 rule would drive up prescription drug prices. The lawsuit targets the Department of Health and Human Services, Internal Revenue Service, and Department of Labor, all of which were involved in the rule. So what's really funny is obviously this is completely against transparency, which is needed to shield the public from nefarious uses of this rule. That's something that's really, really important. The other thing that's really, really important is that they want to not only keep these things away from the public, but they want to negotiate behind closed doors so that you don't get to see exactly like how they go about this negotiating and price change and stuff like that. So let's say your copay is $20, and let's say the PCMA have negotiated the price of, let's say, Adderall. I'm just giving an example. And so now, instead of Adderall being $25 a pill, now it is $5 a pill. And what happens is the PCMA will pocket that difference. So you'll still pay that $25, $30 copay, even though the drug is only like, $5 for the bottle or whatever the case may be. And then the difference is going to be pocketed by the PCMA. This is something that Mr. Buell has gone over very extensively in that podcast, and I definitely recommend you go and seeing that. I mean, I love listening to Joe Rogan, there are times where I'm screaming and yelling at my at my stereo in my car because there are some things I do disagree with and some things I feel like he gets wrong. But for the most part, I really do feel like he's done his research. I feel like these different individuals that come on their show are very informative. I feel like they do share truths. And I think it's important to shed some light on Big Pharma because the way that things are going, unfortunately, Big Pharma is taking part in a lot of nefarious things behind closed doors. And because we don't have this transparency, and this isn't the only thing that isn't transparent, with Big Pharma companies, but that they're astronomically jacking up the prices of these year over year. Like I think I was reading an article earlier yesterday where it was saying that on average between like 1.5 and 2% increase on these drugs year over year. And they're just increasing them because they want to make more money. There isn't any more additional cost. In fact, a lot of the times they actually have driven down the cost of producing these pharmaceutical drugs, and they're continually to getting more profit. And it's passing along, especially with laws and stuff trying to tax these different pharmaceutical companies. It's just passing along these price increases onto the American people. And it's just really, really sad. And, unfortunately, I got to share this with you guys. So it's kind of bad news today. The agencies did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs, serve as intermediate drug manufacturers, health insurance plans, and pharmacies to negotiate prescription drug prices. The PBMs typically negotiate concessions below the normal list price of prescription drugs. The PCMA is challenging a provision of the rule set to take effect in January that will require them to disclose the historical net prices list minus a rebate they negotiate with manufacturers. Information would have to be available to the public in a so-called machine-readable file, which can be processed by a computer. So if they push back on this thing that they're trying to sue the government for, they wouldn't have to share this information. And I think what's really important is that when they do share this information, obviously we know what's going on behind closed doors. It keeps the prices low because obviously they don't want to jack up the prices, and because people will point it out and then they will have to do something and reduce the price. So they're not making as much money. They're still making money, unfortunately. Now, and I'm not saying making money is bad. Like, it's important for businesses to make money because obviously they are making some things that are important, that are helpful, things like insulin, things like EpiPens, things that are, helping with blood thinning or blood, whatever the case may be. There are drugs out there which are helpful. There's also some drugs out there that are not necessary. There's drugs out there that are actually remade drugs, just repackaged from using the drug for one symptom to another, and they're doing that to avert their patents from expiring. And so basically that's what happened with the Oxycontin epidemic that's still going on today. What happened was the pharmaceutical company, their patent was about to lapse. And so basically what they did is they repackaged it. They added a time release onto the Oxycontin. So basically it became a brand new drug, resubmitted their patent, got it patented, and then started using it to alleviate pain. And then all the nonsense that happened, you can look up Dope Sick, look up these other ones that are on Netflix, look at the Appalachian epidemic. Like, there's all of these wonderful information documentaries that can give you all the details on this, because I just do not have the time to go through everything. But it's a very unfortunate thing that's happening. And another thing that's going on is the pharmaceutical companies. There's just a handful of large pharmaceutical companies, unfortunately, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, like these really big, huge companies. There's not a lot of little guys. And unfortunately, if little guys do pop up, they either get bought out or they get sued to the point where they just have to go under. there's a lot of nefarious stuff going on, unfortunately, in the background with Big Pharma. And what's happening is that because there's big, large companies, they're actually communicating with each other and saying, hey, we have similar drugs here. Let's make sure to keep the prices at a certain spot. That way we don't have to keep bringing those prices down to be competitive, and we can make the maximum amount of profits. Like, these things are going on behind closed doors, a wink and a nod and a little handshake, and things are copacetic, unfortunately. So the rule, the organization said, threatens to drive up the total drug price ultimately borne by health plans, taxpayers, and consumers by advancing drug manufacturers in negotiations over price concessions. Armed with information about prices negotiated between manufacturers and PBMs, the group said manufacturers will be able to tactically collude with each other to increase drug prices, which is what they're doing right now. The group said that the rule offers consumers no actionable information because net prescription drug prices are not charged to customers, never appear on a bill, and will likely only confuse them. That's something that's really funny too. They don't disclose, like when you get a bill from going to, like, let's say the emergency room, they gave you some drugs intravenously and gave you some pills afterwards. They don't have to disclose how much those pills, how much per milliliter or deciliter or whatever it is for a syringe of certain medicines. Like, they don't have to disclose that information right now. So you don't know how much you're paying for that, number one, through that agency. And number two, you don't know how much they are jacking up the prices when they take that information and say, hey, Jay Rhymes just went to the hospital, and we want to charge you $6,000 for the night that he was in the hospital for. Even though with all the care, taking care of the doctors, the nurses, the attendants, like everybody that was involved with the whole thing, the night stay, the 3 meals of food, and the medicines may have cost you less than a few $100s. And that's what's wrong with the pharmaceutical companies, the insurance companies, and the whole medical industry. Unfortunately, it's a big behemoth. And unfortunately, we really need to get people in office right now that will go after the pharmaceutical companies. And this is, even on, the right, not only on the left, but even on the right, these individuals have not gone after Big Pharma and made sure that they can't do these kind of shady things behind closed doors, because after all, these individuals, whether the right or the left, they're all about big business. They're all about making profits and making sure they keep their shareholders happy. And unfortunately, it's happening at the cost of American citizens. And this is where I struggle with this. Average Americans are already feeling the pinch. When it comes to medical care, their insurance companies are covering less and less, and medical care alongside of necessary drugs are at an all-time high. Most Americans are putting all of their medical care on credit cards, or the bill comes due, it is being offloaded into collections. And that's something that's really unfortunate, because unfortunately, even with two adults working full-time, let's say they make $80,000 a year, if one of them has to go to the hospital for a week, that's tens of thousands of dollars. And who knows how much they're going to have to pay extra with all the different medications that they are given to sustain their lives. And what's unfortunate is that, we're just putting those on credit cards and paying them off slowly, which in turn, especially with the high prices of credit cards right now, you're paying anywhere between 15, 20, even like 30%. So basically every $100 that you got to spend with that credit card, you have to pay $100 plus $30 back. And a lot of people can't afford that. And unfortunately, just like I am right now, we're in a lot of debt because we've had to offload a lot of that cost, with tires, with car breakdowns, with medical issues, with, whatever the case may be. And unfortunately, that's sitting at collectors, and they're just waiting to get paid, because unfortunately, the way that the system is, that they'll get paid one way or another, and you'll pay more. But I digress. Furthermore, it is said ordinary customers will not be able to interpret a machine-readable file. The PCMA alleges that the Affordable Care Act does not give the government the authority to require PBMs to disclose proprietary information. It also alleges that the requirement that the information be in machine-readable file, which received negative comments during the notice and comment rulemaking period, is arbitrary and capricious under the Administrative Procedure Act. I'm not sure what capricious means. Maybe I should look that up really wet. What does CA, how do you spell it? CA, the word of the day is capricious. Where did I read it? Crap, where did I read it? I just read it. Period. Capricious. Capricious. Merriam-Webster. I guess that's the best we can get. Oh, wow. It's taking forever to load. What the heck? Capricious. Adjective. Impulsive. Unpredictable. Oh, okay. That makes sense. Capricious. Unpredictable. Got it. Under the Administrative Procedure Act. The lawsuit is the latest in a string of healthcare industry challenges to rules passed late former President Donald Trump's administration aiming to curb prescription drug prices. So it looks like the previous administration have worked at doing that. While it is yet clear whether the current president will seek to defend these specific rules, he has also pledged to lower drug prices. So I guess my question is have any of the drugs been lowered under the current administration? Like, he's pledged to do it, but just like we saw with, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, just because you pledge something doesn't necessarily mean that you donated it. Pledging is an act of verbal saying, I am going to do it. Donating means that you actually done it. So the only thing that I found on the web is that the president had frozen 2 rules, which should lower the costs of EpiPens and insulin shots, but nothing indicating them actually going down. There is a plan in the works, so it is uncertain at this time if the current administration is going to help or hurt the pharmaceutical industry. Now, my hope, I really do hope and pray, I really do hope this administration gets down to business and starts working towards putting in laws and litigation against these pharmaceutical companies where they have to reveal how much the drug costs to make and produce and how much they're selling it for at their profit and what it's going to cost insurance and the everyday consumer. And now this is where I really believe we need to go back to like a cash system rather than putting everything on credit. This is where I start going into why I believe that the minimum wage should reflect the necessary needed payment for their work full-time, 40 hours a week, in conjunction with a single student going to work full-time and going to school full-time that can reasonably, have a roof over the head, food on the table, clothes on their back, vehicle to get around town, having some money to enjoy themselves while they're trying to go through this process and get all these wonderful pieces of paper that say that they're smart. Cell phone, internet, electricity, gas, food, cell phone so you can communicate, a laptop so you can do your homework at your home. Like, these are these things that I really feel are really necessary. And I think it's really funny looking at the minimum wage right now, which I believe in Utah is still $7.25 an hour, which even if you doubled that, that's not something that you can reasonably live off of as a single person, as a student, just fresh out of high school, working full time and going to school. Now, this is one of my less conservative views, but I think it's really important because especially when you start getting older, when you get to the point when you start thinking about having a family, like, it's really expensive to have a family. It's like super expensive to have kids. I think my buddy told me a few years back when he had his last kid, I think between the hospital stay, the birthing, all the required staff, like basically living there for was it like 2 or 3 days or something like that, or maybe up to a week? I think it was over like 10 grand just to basically bring your child into this world. And it's something that's natural nature. It's like selling land. I think it's really funny that we have to pay for having land when it's a part of this world and it's not necessarily anybody's, but hey, we got to live somewhere, right? And we got to make profit off of it. But I digress. Okay. The lawsuit and the latest string of healthcare industry challenges to rules passed late in former president's administration aiming to curb prescription drug prices. While it's not yet clear whether the current president will seek to defend those specific rules, he has also pledged to lower drug prices. The current administration in February agreed to postpone a last-minute past administration rule aimed at lowering drug prices by restricting rebates from drug companies to PBMs, which has sued to block the rule. PHRMA, the nation's largest drug manufacturer group, also won a notable victory last December when a federal judge blocked a rule that would have tied Medicare reimbursements for some drugs to prices paid by other countries. The case in Pharmaceutical Care Management Association versus U.S. Department of Health and Human Resources, blah, 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 U.S. District Court, District of Columbia, number 21-CV-02161. And honestly, we're still waiting to see if these current actions have helped or hurt. Unfortunately, I haven't read or heard the things that I was searching for. I didn't really was able to make heads or tails whether the things that have happened in the current administration have really helped or hurt. We've heard a lot of talk. We've heard a lot of, some things have been done, but we haven't really heard or seen if this has actually affected one way or the other. I'm hoping that it has. Unfortunately, for some reason, I just couldn't find it yesterday or today. So that's where we're at on that. So Biden says Putin totally miscalculated by invading Ukraine, but is a rational actor, which is really interesting. Let's dive into this one. So the president said in an exclusive CNN interview Tuesday, he believed Russian President Vladimir Putin is a rational actor who nonetheless badly misjudged his ability to invade Ukraine and suppress its people. I think he is a rational actor who has miscalculated significantly, he told Jake Tapper, as Russian bombardments on civil targets in Ukraine signaled another turning point in the months-long war. So what's interesting about that statement of Putin being an irrational actor is I agree to a degree. Because the reason I say that is because Putin would not have invaded with the bad orange man in office, but he has with the white-haired man in office. What did the current president and administration respond with? Money, billions and billions of dollars, and basically said, hey, Mr. Putin, you better not nuke us or else. That's basically what we got so far. Which is sad. Honestly, this isn't, the current administration, the current president has, in my opinion, not been the most stately, has not been the most strong in efforts in things overseas, has not been strong in issues that we're having in America with U.S. citizens. It seems like it's forward all of our ideologies and damn the rest has kind of been the feeling. Now, obviously, they're not really saying that. Well, actually, they kind of are saying that. They basically are just doing whatever they want because that's what they believe in, instead of allowing the system to do what it's supposed to do. That's my opinion anyways. So the president, who warned last week the risk of nuclear Armageddon, those are some very choice words, was at its highest level in 60 years, said in the interview that threats emanating from Russia could result in catastrophic mistakes and miscalculation, even as he declined to spell out how precisely the United States would respond if Putin deploys a tactical nuclear device on the battlefield in Ukraine. And he said there would be consequences for Saudi Arabia after it partnered with Moscow to announce a cut in oil production, a move that would cause gas prices to increase as November's midterm elections approach. Sounds like we're taking Saudi oil. What's interesting about this and what the president said is that the Cold War ended when the USSR collapsed, and the Cold War lasted from 1947 to 1991. So we've been out of the Cold War for like just over 30 years, if my math is correct. So it's kind of interesting the way that he said about all these different things. But I'm curious as to what consequences the president and his administration is going to fork out against Saudi oil production when he went there in person, I believe, my little aluminum foil hat, to beg for oil since the decision was made to stop or reduce all oil production in the U.S. When we could be self-sufficient when it comes to crude oil, and we were for a time. And oil was cheap, and gas was cheap. Man, I could get an oil change. I remember was like $30 or $40. That's even with synthetic oil. Like there wasn't really a huge price difference. And now I'm spending almost $90. Yeah, almost $90 right now for oil changes. And I get my oil changed every couple of months because I use my vehicle for work. But we're not anymore. We're not in a self-sufficient place because of all these different things that the administration and the president have put on oil production in the U.S. And this is due to climate ideologies and being forced into system causing gas prices to skyrocket. And this is very unfortunate. It's like, again, it's ideology and damn all the costs. Like that's the attitude that we're seeing anyway. So in this particular interview, so check this out. So you listen to what he says. If you listen to the speech he made after when that decision was being made, he talked about the whole idea of he was needed to be the leader of Russia, is talking about Putin, that united all Russian speakers. I mean, it's just, I think it's irrational, Biden said. Wait, what? So he's a rational actor, but but now he thinks he's irrational. This is in the same interview, you guys. Check this out. He even says it in the same sentence. I don't know if you'll catch it, but let me throw this over here so that you guys can see it. And if you're just listening, just listen very carefully because this is really interesting. Let me get it ready for you. F11.
So French President Macron told me that he doesn't think that Putin is acting rationally. And he said that he thinks a lot of this is because of how isolated Putin was for 2 years during the pandemic. And others who have dealt with him, Condi Rice and Bob Gates and James Clapper, have used words like erratic and unhinged to describe Putin's behavior today.
And this is the beginning of the part of the interview where he already said, like, this is 2 minutes into it, but he had already said that he believes that Putin is a rational actor. But he poses another question where other people have said that Putin is, all these people that are talking about Putin is very irrational. Check this out.
Do you think Putin is a rational actor?
I think he is a rational actor who's miscalculated significantly.
Okay.
I think he thought, you may recall, I pointed out that they were going to invade, that all those 100,000 or more troops there, and no one believed that he was going to invade.
So rational right now, right?
You listen to what he says.
Uh-huh.
You listen to the speech he made after, when that decision was being made. He talked about the whole idea of he was needed to be the leader of Russia that united all the Russian speakers. I mean, I just think it's irrational.
Just think it's irrational? You just said in the same sentence that he's a rational actor, and then right afterwards, he's just irrational. I mean, again, I could be wrong, and I'm sure you guys are going to let me know in the comment section down below. But that was fascinating to me, that in the same sentence, he goes, he's a rational actor, but what he did was irrational. It's like, well, which is it? Is he rational or is he irrational? Obviously, he's irrational. Something's going on. So the president contradicts himself, saying that Putin's need to be the leader of Russia was irrational. So which is it? Is it rational or is it irrational? Like, it's kind of, is it left or is it right? Is it one or is it two? And it's almost like he's confused and he's not sure which one he thinks it's supposed to be. Now, this is just my opinion, obviously. I could be reading into it, but this is just what I'm seeing. So this is amid the almost 8-month invasion as Russian forces are suffering embarrassing losses. And this has been really, really funny because just recently they did a recent insurgence from the Russian side, and they actually killed 10 people, wounding 100 people in this bombing attempt that they did on Ukraine's soil. And Russia's actually kind of small. Russia makes up less than 2% of the world's population, is just under half of the U.S. population. So somewhere around a third of the U.S. population, that's Russia. So they're kind of a small guy in a bigger fish bowl. I think the speech is I think his speech, his objectives were not rational. So this is where we're at right now. He was rational, not rational. I think he thought, stumbling over his words, he was going to be welcomed with open arms. Was the home of Mother Russia in Kiev. In that, where he was going to be welcomed, I think he just totally miscalculated, the president said. So after reading this article, it is clear that it is full of the president contradicting himself, as well as repeating himself, as well as bumbling and falling over his words. And now, don't get me wrong. Like, that doesn't mean that he's a bad person. It doesn't mean like he's terrible. Like, it just means that there's something going on. Like, for instance, when you hear me talk and you hear me have a stream of consciousness, and all of a sudden I'm struggling to kind of catch the next part of the narrative that I'm laying out, the next part of the story that I'm telling, the next part of the commentary that I'm giving for these different articles. This is because, like, I've had, at least 4 concussions that I know of within my life. And I think I believe there has been some damage, and that's where I struggle sometimes with finding a certain word, a certain phrase, and I have to start going again and kind of talk through it, and then I find it, and then I kind of continue going. But this happened several times. Remember Repeat the Line? Remember him trying to shake hands with ghosts? Like, something is going on psychologically with our president. And I don't think I'm the only one that has been seeing this. I think many people are talking about this and wondering what's going on, and nobody wants to talk about the president's current health state, because apparently he's fit and ready for duty, but there's definitely something going on. And I guess it begs the question, does the current president seem lucid and ready to meet the task at hand? Does he seem like he's a president, like presidential? Because the way that he's been speaking, the way he's been talking, I'm sorry, it just doesn't seem that way. He goes on, I'm in the process when the House and state gets back, they're going to have to, pause, there's going to be some consequences for what they've done with Russia, Biden said. The decision by the Saudi-led OPEC Plus oil cartel to cut production last week prompted anger at the White House, where officials said that the president was personally disappointed by what they called a short-sighted decision. The move, which came 3 months after the president visited Saudi Arabia and met its de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has the potential to raise gas prices in the weeks ahead of November's midterm elections. Let's get straight why I went, the president said. I didn't go out about oil. I went out about making sure that we made sure that we weren't going to walk away from the Middle East. So then why did we pull out? And why did we pull out so fast? Killing people, leaving billions of dollars worth of weapons and armory and helicopters and jeeps and trucks. And I'm sure we left all the oil over there as well. I don't know. So, okay, let's get back to this. The consequences are going to be on the backs of the American people, as we are now very dependent on Saudi oil, while Americans are still feeling the effects of the administration's bad decisions of cutting back on oil production, which has stopped much of the oil production in the U.S. So what consequences are they thinking about for Saudi Arabia? Like, what are we going to do? Like, he says there are going to be consequences, but he's not really forthcoming as to what his plan is. Now, granted, I'm sure that's on purpose so that, they don't know exactly what's going on or what's going to happen, and it could be bad or it could not be bad. Like, I get it. But doesn't it not seem like they're being very slow to making moves on this? I mean, it does, doesn't it? And it seems like those moves are not helping. Like, remember when the president of the administration opened up our oil reserves that were reserved for military, and the price went down, $1? Now it's back up again. Now we're seeing the prices rise like very, very slowly week to week. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be like, it was almost down to $4. Now it's back up to $4.29. I bet by the end of this month, it's going to be $4.50 again, because it was just a Band-Aid to stop the Niagara Falls. So I think what the president said, in my opinion, this is my aluminum foil hat, if you may. I believe what the president said was an outright lie. I believe very strongly that when he went to visit the Saudi Arabian prince, that he went there to beg for oil and to say, hey, buddy, we need oil. We're going to pay you lots of money. Give it to us. We're not going to pump anymore. And that's why he went there. And this is what's really interesting, is because if we're trying to save our planet, what's the difference from pumping oil out of the United States versus pumping oil within the United States? Like, what's the difference? Like, we're still polluting the air quality anyways. We're still running vehicles anyways. So it's like, how is that helping? I know this is just the things that go in my mind. So I believe it's really funny because he goes on and says, well, I'm going to go there and I'm going to talk to him about this. And I believe he already has. And the president will continue to keep his head in the sand, saying that we're not in a recession when we clearly are. So where do we go from here? Because we've already had the negative GDP for several quarters in a row now. So if we're not in a recession, and him and his administration claim, oh, it might be a little tiny dip, but it's not even going to be noticeable. Well, then why are we in almost 9% inflation, like quarter over quarter, month over month? Why is it that, eggs and bread are twice as much? Why are we paying $3 more a gallon for gas, like since the inception of this current administration? Like, how come we are paying more for goods and services? Like, I used to get my dog's nails grinded down for $4 a dog. And just recently I went back there to do my dog's nails again, and now they're charging $12 to $14 a dog for nail grinding. And they wonder why? Well, this is what happens. These are the consequences when we have these Democratic leaders who believe that it is ideology over everything else. And it's really, really sad, because all it is just passing the buck of their bad decisions onto the backs of America, of Americans. We're feeling the pinch. Like, it's really unfortunate. Like, it really, really sucks that we have to have both the wife and the husband working full time, when they have kids that they need to take care of, and they're barely getting by. Like what's the average income right now for couples? What is the average income for couples? So it looks like between like individuals annually are probably making around $30,000. So let's say both parents work and they're working their butts off. They're both accumulating about $60,000 a year. With current house prices, they can't afford that. With current rent prices, they can't afford that. With current prices for vehicles, for gas, for food and goods and services, we can't afford that reasonably for a long period of time. Like, this is really, it's going to turn things bad if we don't turn this around soon. And I don't know if they're going to do it within this administration to kind of get ready for, the primaries here in a couple of years. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're probably going to do a few things to save face, like they kind of did to, complete the, some of the border that was missing down in the southern parts of Arizona, like things that are kind of be doing quietly so that they can later on say, oh, but we did this big thing. Mark my words. Mark my words, it's going to occur. I am still hopeful. I am still hopeful that things can be turned around. I'm still hopeful that people can, better their lives, whether it's to get into trade school, whether it's to, further the education so they get that next piece of paper that says that they're a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser, a little bit more amenable for the workforce. I think it's kind of an unfortunate thing that we live in a day and age where in order to get a job to get paid $40,000 a year, you need to have a bachelor's degree. For managing people at a plant, it's like, why? Like, managing people is managing people. I have over 10 years of managerial service. Nobody will touch me because I don't have an associate's degree. I don't have a bachelor's degree. I don't have a master's. I don't have those wonderful letters at the end of my name. And honestly, I don't feel like it's going to help me in the long run if I go back to school and get some kind of degree, because I don't want to sit there and be lectured of how orange man bad, how males are bad, how being white is bad, how not, teaching kids about sexual orientation is bad. Why because you are white, you are racist and you are bad. Like, I'm not going to sit there and take that bullshit. And neither should you. And from my family to yours, good night. Today's video is sponsored by viewers like you, so thank you. If we earned your subscription today, don't forget to hit that red subscribe button, click that damn bell, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss a content release. The best way to support the channel is to like this video, share it with family and friends, and don't forget to leave a comment down below. Send all of your topic ideas, articles, and video links to theperiodicreview@gmail.com. All of our links are in the description down below.